Is an Eyewitness News update, and we have that breaking news. Just learning actress Raquel Welch has died.
I never really thought of myself as pretty. When I got a little bit older, the equipment arrived. The press conference when I first came into town to promote the film. You're a nice-sized lady and all that, but you're not exactly what I expected.
The image is unforgettable. Raquel Welch, standing in a prehistoric landscape, wearing the iconic costume from 1 million years B.C. With just that single moment, she became the face of an era, a global icon whose beauty was featured on posters and billboards across the world. But while the photo promised effortless stardom, the reality behind it was anything but simple. That iconic shot launched her career, defined her, trapped her, and forced her to fight for dignity in an industry that was eager to objectify her but reluctant to respect her. Raquel Welch's story didn't begin under the bright lights of Hollywood. She was born Jo Raquel Tejada on September 5, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, to a family that carried both discipline and hardship in equal measure. Her father, Armando, was a strict Bolivian-born aeronautical engineer who believed in structure and control, while her mother, Josephine, was of English descent and carried a quieter presence in the household. When the family moved to San Diego, Raquel was still a child, and her upbringing quickly took shape under her father's firm hand. The household wasn't one filled with warmth or encouragement. Instead, it was marked by tension. Years later, Raquel would reveal that her father's harsh treatment of her mother left scars on the family, and in one explosive moment, Raquel herself once threatened him with a fireplace poker during an argument, standing up for the woman who had no voice. It was a glimpse into the fire and determination that would define her entire life. From the time she was 7, Raquel poured her energy into ballet, training relentlessly for more than a decade. She imagined a future where she could perform on great stages, but that dream collapsed brutally when her instructor told her that her voluptuous body would never fit the narrow mold of a ballerina. At 17, her ambitions shattered. She found herself searching for another outlet. Instead of quitting, she turned her focus toward beauty pageants, where her striking features set her apart in an America still dominated by fair-haired ideals. She won titles like Miss La Jolla, Miss Photogenic, and eventually Miss San Diego, each crown adding confidence, while also painting her into a role she both embraced and resented. She was admired for her beauty, but rarely for her talent. During those years, Raquel's personal life moved quickly. In 1959, she married her high school sweetheart James Welch, barely out of her teens, and soon became a mother to 2 children, Damon and Tani. The marriage, however, was troubled almost from the start. Juggling early motherhood with the desire to chase her dreams proved overwhelming, and by 1964, she was divorced and left to raise her children on her own. The name Welch, though, would stick, becoming part of her identity even as she left her marriage behind. To support her family, Raquel took work wherever she could find it. Modeling jobs, small acting parts, and even a position as a weather presenter at a San Diego TV station. Viewers tuned in to see her deliver forecasts, but behind the glamorous smile was a young woman barely keeping things together, working late nights and early mornings, often exhausted but unwilling to give up. By the early 1960s, Raquel realized she needed more than local television to break through. She moved to Dallas for a short time, working as a cocktail waitress and model, before returning to Los Angeles where her real struggle began. Hollywood in those days wasn't welcoming to women of mixed heritage. Casting directors often suggested she change her last name to something less ethnic, urging her to pass herself off as fully European. Though she eventually chose to use her married name Welch, the decision was less about pride and more about survival in an industry unwilling to embrace diversity. In auditions, she was often dismissed or typecast, forced into tiny background roles that did little to showcase her ambition. She appeared briefly in shows like Bewitched and The Virginian, blink and you'll miss it parts that gave her experience but no recognition. Still, Raquel was determined. She carried the same grit that had pushed her through years of ballet training, now channeling it into breaking Hollywood's barriers. What fueled her during these difficult years was the belief that she was meant for something greater. Even as a single mother juggling responsibilities, she kept chasing opportunities with relentless energy. Those early struggles shaped her resilience and hardened her against rejection. By the mid-1960s, Raquel Welch was still hustling through bit parts and commercials, but everything changed the moment she signed a contract with 20th Century Fox. At first, the studio didn't quite know what to do with her. They gave her small roles and considered shelving her behind their other rising stars. But when Fox cast her in Fantastic Voyage in 1966, everything shifted. In that film, she played a member of a miniaturized medical team traveling inside the human body. It was science fiction at its peak, dazzling audiences with special effects, and Raquel's presence stood out even with limited lines. The camera adored her, and Hollywood noticed. Almost immediately afterward, Fox loaned her to Hammer Films in Britain for a low-budget prehistoric adventure that nobody expected to matter. That film was 1 Million Years B.C., and it would change her life forever. The role was simple on paper. She played Loana, a cave woman who mostly expressed herself through gestures and looks rather than dialogue. In fact, she had only a handful of lines. But what mattered wasn't the script, it was the costume. Hammer's designers put Raquel in a distinctive costume that was meant to look primitive, but instead became one of the most iconic outfits in film history. When production stills were released, especially the famous poster of Raquel standing in a rugged landscape, hands on hips, it became an instant cultural phenomenon. That image sold the movie worldwide, featured across billboards, magazine covers, and posters everywhere. Practically overnight, Raquel Welch was transformed from a struggling actress into one of the most recognized faces on the planet. But while the public saw glamour, Raquel felt something else entirely. She admitted later that she was deeply uncomfortable with the costume and the attention it brought. She had taken the job because she needed to support her children and prove herself as an actress, but the studio machine reduced her to an image before she even had a chance to build a career. The irony wasn't lost on her. The role that required almost no acting defined her forever, and the iconic costume became both her ticket to stardom and the limitation that constrained her. Producers now saw her as the ultimate movie star image, and rather than offering her complex roles, they lined up projects that showcased her appearance more than her talent. Still, Raquel played the game with resilience. She knew that refusing roles could mean fading back into obscurity, so she walked a careful line, taking parts that kept her visible but quietly searching for projects that would prove she was more than a poster image. By 1967 and 1968, she was starring in films like Bedazzled and Bandolero, continuing to climb, but the shadow of that one photograph followed her everywhere. The press dubbed her the new Marilyn Monroe, but Raquel rejected the comparison. She didn't want to be another tragic blonde bombshell. After the overnight fame of the iconic costume, Raquel Welch knew she had a choice: stay silent and accept her role as a movie poster image, or gamble on films that could make her more than just a fantasy. She chose the latter, and the risks she took would push Hollywood's boundaries, stir public outrage, and nearly cost her everything. One of the first lightning rod moments came in 1969, when she starred opposite NFL star Jim Brown in 100 Riffles. The film was a Western adventure set in Mexico, but what shocked audiences had little to do with its story. Raquel and Jim Brown shared an on-screen love scene, one of the first high-profile interracial romances shown in mainstream American cinema. At a time when interracial marriage had only just been legalized in many states, the scene was groundbreaking and explosive. Viewers in conservative regions were outraged, critics sneered, and the backlash was fierce. Raquel, however, didn't back down. She defended the film and her role, insisting she had no regrets. The following year, Raquel doubled down with a project that remains one of the strangest and most controversial films of its era, Mira Breckinridge. Based on Gore Vidal's novel, the movie cast her as Mira, a transgender woman with an agenda to dismantle Hollywood's traditional power structures. On paper, it was daring and progressive. In reality, it became a chaotic production filled with behind-the-scenes drama. Raquel clashed bitterly with her co-star Mae West, who refused to appear in scenes with her, and the studio struggled to control the spiraling costs and egos. When the movie was released in 1970, it was a disaster. Critics ripped it apart, audiences were confused, and Raquel's performance was overshadowed by the scandal of the subject matter. The film quickly became a symbol of excess and failure, and her willingness to take on such a role only reinforced Hollywood's image of her as difficult. By the early 1980s, Raquel Welch was no longer just battling for serious roles. She was fighting for her survival in Hollywood. After years of being typecast, clashing with producers, and enduring the lingering shadow of Myra Breckinridge, her career entered its most brutal chapter. The turning point came with a film adaptation of John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. Raquel had been cast as the female lead, a role she believed could finally redefine her career and showcase her depth as an actress. But almost as soon as production began, the project turned toxic. In a shocking move, MGM abruptly fired her, claiming she had breached her contract. The studio replaced her with Deborah Winger and publicly painted Raquel as difficult, feeding the already persistent rumors that she was uncooperative and too demanding to work with. For Raquel, the firing was devastating, not only because it meant the loss of a potentially career-saving role, but because it struck at her reputation. Being labeled difficult in Hollywood was often a career death sentence, especially for women. But Raquel wasn't willing to let the studio destroy her name without a fight. She took MGM to court, launching a legal battle that dragged through the headlines. The trial was bitter and messy, with the studio accusing her of everything from unprofessional behavior to vanity-driven delays. Raquel, in turn, exposed the double standards that plagued Hollywood, arguing that male stars were allowed eccentricities but women were punished for asserting boundaries. In 1986, after years of fighting, she won. A jury sided with her, awarding her $10.8 million in damages. It was a monumental victory, and on paper, it should have been a triumphant moment. But the reality was harsher. Hollywood has a long memory, and even as Raquel celebrated the verdict, whispers of her being trouble followed her. Casting directors hesitated, producers avoided her, and projects that should have come her way suddenly evaporated. She had defeated a studio in court, but in doing so, she was quietly blackballed. The damage extended beyond the courtroom. By this time, Raquel had already endured grueling physical demands on set that many actors would never have tolerated. On Kansas City Bomber in 1972, where she played a roller derby athlete, she threw herself into the role so intensely that she ended up with a broken wrist, swollen knees, split lips, and bruises covering her body. The injuries were real, the suffering was real, and yet she was often dismissed as a glamorous figure coasting on her looks. Hollywood rarely credited her grit, preferring instead to mock her as a diva. That contradiction defined much of her career. She worked harder than anyone realized, only to have her effort erased by a single poster or a single rumor. By the mid-1980s, Raquel's film career had stalled. She had proven her resilience, won her lawsuit, and fought to maintain her dignity, but the industry seemed eager to move on without her. When Hollywood tried to close its doors on Raquel Welch, she refused to vanish quietly. Instead, she found a new way to turn her fame into power. If the film industry wouldn't give her roles, she would reinvent herself as a brand. The shift began in the late 1970s when Raquel capitalized on the growing fitness craze sweeping America. She released the Raquel Welch Total Beauty and Fitness Program in 1984, a book and video series that became an international success. In an era when Jane Fonda dominated aerobics, Raquel entered the space with her own glamorous spin, combining exercise routines with beauty advice. Viewers who had once admired her on the big screen now turned to her as a guide for maintaining youth and elegance. But Raquel didn't stop at fitness. She identified a gap in the beauty market and launched a wig line, Hair-Aware, which exploded in popularity. For women struggling with thinning hair or seeking stylish options, Raquel's wigs offered both practicality and prestige. The brand's success was staggering, generating millions of dollars and proving that she could dominate outside of Hollywood. Over time, her name became synonymous not just with screen glamour, but with timeless beauty products. Later, she expanded into jewelry and cosmetics, further solidifying her place as an entrepreneur. In 2007, even decades after her supposed decline, she was chosen by MAC Cosmetics as the face of their Beauty Icon series, a reminder that her allure had evolved. For all the public glamour and business triumphs, Raquel Welch's private life was far more complicated. Behind the flawless image she presented to the world, she carried deep wounds from her childhood and endured a string of personal struggles that never fully left her. Her marriages reflected the turmoil of a woman searching for stability but rarely finding it. Her first marriage, to James Welch, gave her 2 children but collapsed under the pressures of early parenthood and her growing ambitions. Her second husband, Patrick Curtis, who also became her manager, helped steer her career during her rise to fame. but their relationship was shadowed by troubling rumors, including Curtis allegedly claiming Raquel had an abortion during their time together. Stories also circulated about Curtis confronting Spanish actor Sancho Gracia with a gun after suspecting an affair between him and Raquel during the filming of 100 Riffles. Whether exaggerated or true, the rumors only added to her image as a star constantly surrounded by drama. Her later marriages didn't fare much better. In 1980, she wed French producer André Weinfeld, a union that lasted a decade before ending in divorce. By 1999, she married restaurateur Richie Palmer, but that relationship too unraveled after just a few years, with reports of jealousy, disagreements, and incompatibility filling the tabloids. To the public, Raquel seemed glamorous and untouchable, but behind closed doors, she was a woman who had searched for lasting love and failed to find it, over and over again. As the years passed, Raquel Welch gradually stepped back from the center of Hollywood, but she never disappeared completely. Even in her 60s and 70s, she remained a striking presence, appearing at premieres, television interviews, and occasional film roles that reminded audiences she was still larger than life. One of her last major appearances came in 2017 with the comedy How to Be a Latin Lover, where she played a wealthy widow whose glamour and charisma still turned heads. The role was small but symbolic, proof that even late in life Raquel could light up the screen with a single glance. Fans marveled at her ability to maintain her beauty and composure, while younger audiences discovered her for the first time, curious about the legend behind the name. Yet away from the cameras, Raquel faced battles she could not control. In her later years, she suffered from Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis her family kept private until after her death. For a woman who had spent her entire life fighting to be recognized as more than her image, it was a cruel twist that her final years were marked by quiet decline, largely hidden from public view. On February 15, 2023, Raquel Welch passed away at the age of 82. The official cause reported as cardiac arrest. The news stunned fans around the world, sparking an outpouring of tributes not only from Hollywood, but from ordinary people who had grown up with her image as a permanent fixture in popular culture. Her death prompted a re-examination of her legacy, and it quickly became clear that Raquel Welch was far more than the iconic movie star that defined her early fame. She had reshaped Hollywood's perception of female beauty, breaking away from the platinum blonde archetype of Marilyn Monroe and instead ushering in a new standard, the brunette bombshell whose looks carried both power and mystery. For women of mixed heritage, her success was also groundbreaking, even if her name and studio branding often masked her Latin roots. Her influence stretched beyond film. Generations of actresses who followed her credited Raquel with proving that sex appeal and strength could coexist, that a woman could be glamorous without being submissive, bold without being dismissed. And beyond the screen, her business empire ensured that her name would live on in households far beyond Hollywood. Whether through wigs, fitness programs, or beauty products, she created a brand that outlasted the fickle nature of movie stardom. Raquel Welch's life was a paradox, a story that dazzled the public with beauty while hiding private battles that only a few ever glimpsed. To millions, she was the iconic star from the famous costume, frozen forever as a symbol of an era when Hollywood created memorable movie images and fantasies. But to those who looked closer, her story revealed something much deeper. A woman who refused to surrender to an industry that tried to define her at every turn. She fought for roles that challenged taboos, stood her ground against powerful studios, reinvented herself as a business icon, and survived scandals, heartbreak, and loneliness with a resilience that astonished even her critics. And so the question lingers, was that iconic image her greatest triumph, or the trap she spent her life trying to escape? Perhaps the truth is that it was both. But what can never be denied is that Raquel Welch, in all her contradictions, remains unforgettable. Not just because of how she looked, but because of how fiercely she lived. Raquel Welch's story reminds us that behind every icon is a human being fighting their own battles, building their own legacy, and refusing to be defined by just one moment. If this untold story of Hollywood's most misunderstood star fascinated you, make sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments which part of her journey surprised you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories about the legends who shaped our culture. There are so many more shocking secrets waiting to be revealed.